Mrs. Abernathy, I need to speak with you about something concerning. Zara Katsaros, the head nurse at Suncrest Assisted Living, stood in my doorway with a clipboard clutched to her chest and worry etched across her face. The afternoon light cast long shadows through my window, illuminating the dust particles dancing in the air between us. I gestured for her to enter, setting aside the book I'd been pretending to read for the past hour. "What is it, Zara?" She sat on the edge of my armchair. Her usual professional demeanor softened by what I would soon recognize as pity. "We've been trying to reach your children about your upcoming care plan review. Clayton's assistant said he's traveling, and Imogen's office told us she's not taking calls regarding." Zara hesitated, glancing down at her clipboard. "Regarding non-medical family matters at this time." A small pain bloomed in my chest, but I nodded as if this was expected news. "That's not all." Zara continued, her Greek accent thickening as it always did when she was upset. "When we persisted explaining, it was about your care. Clayton's assistant informed us that you have no close family available for consultation, and that all matters should be directed to your children's lawyer." The words struck like physical blows. No close family. The phrase echoed in my mind as I stared at the wall of photos I'd arranged myself. Clayton's graduation, Imogen's wedding, my 4 grandchildren at various ages, 35 years of teaching other people's children, followed by raising 2 of my own, and now I had no close family. My hands trembled slightly as I smoothed my skirt. "I see, Mrs. Abernathy Meredith," Zara said, using my first name for the first time in the 8 months I'd been at Suncrest. "This isn't right." Your son added that they're too busy to manage long-distance care decisions and suggested we handle matters as we see fit. The careful facade I'd maintained cracked slightly. Did he now? My voice sounded strange to my own ears, thin and brittle like ice about to shatter. "I thought you should know," Zara said, reaching out to pat my hand. "If there's anyone else we can contact for you." "There's no one," I interrupted, then corrected myself. "I mean, not yet." Zara looked confused by my cryptic response, but nodded sympathetically. After she left, I sat motionless, staring at the family photos that now seemed like props on a stage, creating the illusion of a relationship that no longer existed. No close family. The words of my son, my Clayton, whom I'd nursed through chickenpox and heartbreaks, whose college tuition I'd paid by taking on extra tutoring jobs after school, whose first home's down payment had come from the money Thaddeus and I had saved for our retirement cruise. No close family. Said by Imogen, my brilliant daughter who'd called me daily during her medical residency, who'd cried in my arms when her first serious boyfriend left her, whose children I'd watched every weekend while she built her pediatric practice. I picked up my cell phone and scrolled through the call history. 3 months since Clayton had answered. 5 since Imogen had called, rather than just sending a brief text reply. 8 months since I'd seen any of my grandchildren, since before my fall before Suncrest. When I broke my hip, they'd both flown in. Efficiently, packed up my home of 40 years and arranged for me to move into assisted living. "It's for the best," Mom, Clayton had insisted while boxing up my treasured books. "You can't manage in that big house alone anymore. We'll visit all the time," Imogen had promised, selecting which clothes I could bring to my new, smaller closet. "Phoenix is just a short flight from Seattle." I hadn't wanted to leave my home, but they'd convinced me it was temporary, just until I recovered my strength. Then the temporary stay stretched on. Their visits became postponed, then canceled. Calls went unanswered. Emails received delayed, distracted responses. And now officially, I had no close family. A knock at my door interrupted my thoughts. It was Dante Espinoza, the young man who delivered our newspapers and mail each day. His warm smile was a daily bright spot. "Afternoon. Mrs. A got your Phoenix Gazette and these letters." He handed me the newspaper and a small bundle of envelopes. "Thank you, Dante," I said, trying to sound normal despite the hollow feeling in my chest. He paused. his usual quick delivery routine broken by concern. "Everything okay today? You look like my abuela did when her cat died." The unexpected comparison surprised a small laugh out of me. "I've received some disappointing news about my family." Dante nodded sagely, as if at 34 he was well acquainted with family disappointments. "Family can break your heart worse than anybody," he said simply. "That's why I believe we get two families, the one we're born with and the one we choose." He continued on his rounds, unaware that his casual wisdom had planted a seed in my mind that would change everything. I wasn't always alone. For 42 years, I had Thaddeus, my steady, brilliant engineer husband, who built bridges by day and read poetry to me by night. We'd met in college at Arizona State, married young and built a life centered around our work and our children. Our modest Phoenix home near the elementary school, where I taught 3rd grade, had been filled with noise books and love. Thaddeus and I had planned meticulously for our retirement, saving enough to be comfortable while still helping our children whenever they needed it. When Thaddeus died from a massive stroke 5 years ago, our children had been genuinely devastated. Clayton flew in immediately from Chicago, handling funeral arrangements with grim efficiency. Imogen arrived from Seattle with her husband and children, filling my empty house with the comfort of voices and footsteps. But after the funeral, after the casseroles from neighbors stopped arriving and the phone calls from concerned friends dwindled, the silence returned, and with it came a subtle shift in my relationship with my children. Clayton began asking about financial matters, insurance policies, bank accounts, the deed to the house, just wanting to make sure everything is in order. He'd assured me Imogen suggested I might want to consider downsizing. "That house is too big for one person." "Mom," she'd said during one of her increasingly infrequent calls, "have you thought about one of those nice retirement communities?" I'd resisted. Teaching had been my life, and though I'd retired 5 years before Thaddeus died, I stayed active in my community, volunteering at my old school, participating in my book club, tending my garden. I wasn't ready to leave the home where Thaddeus and I had built our life together. Then came the fall, a simple misstep in my garden, a shattered hip emergency surgery. Suddenly, I was dependent in ways I'd never been. Clayton and Imogen swooped in with solutions that prioritized efficiency over my wishes. Within weeks, my house was on the market. Most of my possessions were sold or stored, and I was installed at Suncrest Assisted Living. It's one of the best facilities in Arizona. Clayton had assured me his real estate expertise apparently extending to retirement homes. "The medical care is excellent," Imogen had added with the authority of her MD. Neither mentioned that Suncrest was also conveniently situated to require minimal intervention from them. Neither asked what I wanted. The first few months they called regularly. Clayton would brief me on the status of my house sale, assuring me the proceeds were being properly managed. Imogen would inquire about my physical therapy progress with clinical detachment. Then the calls dwindled. My texts went unanswered for days. My emails received increasingly perfunctory replies. The last time I saw Clayton in person was 3 months after I moved to Suncrest. He arrived with a stack of papers, power of attorney documents, healthcare directives, financial authorizations. "This will make everything easier." "Mom," he'd said, sliding a pen into my hand, "you won't have to worry about any of these complicated matters." I'd hesitated reading through the documents with the careful attention I'd always given to school contracts and permission slips. "Is something wrong?" Clayton had asked, checking his watch. "I have a flight to catch." "This gives you complete control over all my assets," I'd observed. His smile had tightened. "That's the point, Mom. So you don't have to deal with these stressful decisions." I'd signed some documents, but requested time to review others. The annoyance that flashed across his face was quickly concealed, but I'd seen it. That night, I overheard him on the phone with his wife Saskia. "She's being difficult," he'd said, his voice drifting through my partially open door as he stood in the hallway. "Just give it time. Another few months in that place, she'll be desperate for visitors. She'll sign anything then." His words had frozen me in place, a half-folded sweater clutched in my hands. I'd always known Clayton was ambitious, proud of it even, but I'd never thought that ambition extended to manipulating his own mother. That was the night I stopped waiting by the phone. 3 days after Zara's revelation about my no close family status, I was sitting in the Suncrest garden, staring at a birthday card that had been returned to sender. I'd mailed it to my youngest granddaughter, Penny, who was turning 7. The envelope came back marked "Return to sender" in Imogen's handwriting with "Moved, no forwarding address" scrawled beneath. They hadn't moved. I'd seen photos on Imogen's Facebook page just last week. Penny blowing out candles in the same dining room. I'd visited many times in Seattle. The tears came hot and fast, blurring the cheerful cartoon unicorn on the card I'd selected so carefully I didn't hear Dante approach until he cleared his throat softly. "Mrs. A? You okay?" I quickly wiped my eyes. "Just allergies." I lied. He gestured to the returned envelope. "That doesn't look like allergies to me." Perhaps it was his gentle tone, or perhaps it was simply that I'd reached my breaking point. But suddenly I was telling him everything about Thaddeus, about my children's abandonment, about the no close family designation that had finally made clear where I stood in their lives. Dante listened without interruption, his newspaper delivery bag temporarily forgotten at his feet. When I finished, he sat on the bench beside me. "My parents died when I was 17. He said quietly. "Car accident. No other family to speak of. I bounced around, got into some trouble, then straightened myself out. But you know what's always stuck with me? The loneliness of having no one who's obligated to care about what happens to you." He nodded toward the card in my lap. "People think blood means someone will always be there, but that's not how it works. Family is who shows up, who calls just to check in, who remembers your birthday without Facebook reminders, who sits with you when you're hurting." His words resonated in a way that all my self-pitying thoughts had not. I looked at him, really looked at him for perhaps the first time. Dante was in his mid-30s, with warm brown eyes and the beginning of silver threading through his dark hair. He delivered newspapers and mail at Suncrest, but he also chatted with residents, remembered their grandchildren's names, brought occasional treats from the bakery where his girlfriend worked. "You're right," I said slowly, a new resolve forming. "If my children don't consider me family, perhaps it's time I created a new definition of family for myself." Dante grinned. "Now you're talking, Mrs. A." The next day I called Atticus Finchley, a lawyer who had been recommended by one of my former teaching colleagues. Atticus was in his 60s, with a reputation for being meticulous and ethical, and for taking no prisoners when it came to protecting his clients' interests. "I need to make some changes to my will and financial arrangements," I told him during our first meeting in his downtown Phoenix office. "And I need to ensure these changes cannot be easily contested." Atticus listened carefully as I outlined what I wanted to do. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "What you're suggesting is perfectly legal," he assured me. "But may I ask what precipitated this decision?" I showed him the return to sender card, the unanswered emails, the logs of calls never returned. I told him about Zara's revelation and Clayton's overheard conversation. With each piece of evidence, his expression grew more somber. "Unfortunately, what you're describing is all too common," he said finally. "But most people in your situation either don't have the courage or the clarity to take action, as you're doing." We spent the next 2 hours outlining a plan, one that would protect my assets, honor my wishes, and ensure that my children couldn't interfere. By the time I left his office, I felt lighter than I had in months. The pain was still there, but now it was accompanied by purpose. Over the next several weeks, I methodically implemented my plan. I gathered evidence of my children's neglect, saving unreturned voicemails, documenting missed visits, keeping a journal of each time they broke a promise to call or visit. I requested and received a formal letter from Suncrest confirming that neither of my children had visited or called the facility in over 6 months, despite multiple attempts to reach them regarding my care. I set up a trust that would manage most of my assets while I was still alive, removing them from any potential claim under the power of attorney Clayton had pressured me to sign. I established a scholarship fund at the elementary school where I'd taught for 4 decades, designating a portion of my estate to support future teachers. And I began spending time with Dante. At first, it was just conversation during his daily deliveries. Then, when he mentioned he was taking night classes to finish his business degree, I offered to help him study my teaching instincts, reawakening. "I'm not very good at accounting," he admitted during one study session in the Suncrest common room. "That's one area where I can definitely help," I replied, remembering how I'd managed our family finances while Thaddeus focused on his engineering projects. Thaddeus used to say I could squeeze a penny until Lincoln winked. Dante laughed, and for a moment, I glimpsed what it might have been like to have a son who genuinely enjoyed my company. Our study sessions became a regular occurrence. 3 times a week, Dante would arrive after his newspaper route, textbooks in hand. We'd spread out at a table in the common room, working through business concepts and accounting principles. Other residents began to notice some joining us occasionally to offer their own professional insights. "You know what you're doing, don't you?" My neighbor Eleanor asked one evening after Dante had left. "You're building yourself a new family." I hadn't thought of it quite so explicitly, but she was right. Besides Dante, I'd begun forming connections with other residents who, like me, had been essentially abandoned by their families. We started a book club that met in my apartment, sharing stories and experiences along with literary discussion. Zara, the nurse who had first told me about my children's betrayal, became a friend rather than just a caregiver. She began joining me for coffee during her breaks, sharing stories about her Greek family and their traditions. 6 months into my new life at Suncrest, Clayton called unexpectedly. "Mom," he said, without preamble, "we need to discuss selling the contents of your storage unit. It's costing money every month, and you're not using any of that stuff." "No. How are you?" No explanation for his months of silence. Just straight to business. My possessions, his convenience. "I'm using the storage unit," I replied calmly. "I've been having items delivered to me as needed." This was true. With Dante's help, I'd been gradually reclaiming my favorite books, photo albums and keepsakes, the ones Clayton and Imogen had deemed unnecessary for my new life. "That's not efficient," Clayton argued. "Better to sell everything and add the money to your care fund." "My care is fully covered," I reminded him. Thaddeus made sure of that. "Mom." Clayton's voice took on the patronizing tone he'd developed since my fall. "You're not thinking clearly about your financial future. Let me handle this." "No," I said simply. There was a startled silence on the other end of the line. "No," Clayton repeated as if I'd spoken in a foreign language. "No, I confirmed." "And Clayton, I've revoked your power of attorney. Atticus Finchley is handling my affairs now." The explosion that followed was both predictable and revealing. Clayton cycled through disbelief, anger, and finally threats. "You can't do this," he insisted. "You're not competent to manage your own affairs." "Suncrest's medical director disagrees," I replied, thinking of the cognitive assessment I'd requested specifically for this conversation. "As does my lawyer. Goodbye, Clayton. Give my love to Saskia and the children." I hung up before he could respond. The call from Imogen came the next day. "Mom, what's going on? Clayton says you've hired some lawyer and you're making irrational decisions." "Hello to you too, Imogen," I said. "It's been... Let me check 4 months since we last spoke. How are the children? How was Penny's birthday?" Her hesitation told me everything. "We've been extremely busy," she said finally. "The practice is expanding and the kids have so many activities." "Too busy to accept a birthday card for your daughter?" I asked, my voice steady despite the hurt that still lingered. "Too busy to return a phone call from your mother's nursing home?" "That's not fair," Imogen protested. We're dealing with our own lives, Mom. We can't drop everything every time you need attention. The cruelty of her words hung in the air between us. Every time I need attention, as if I'd been demanding rather than merely existing. As if asking for a return phone call was an unreasonable imposition on her busy, important life. You told Suncrest I have no close family, I said quietly. I'm simply respecting your assessment of our relationship. I could hear her intake of breath. That's not what Clayton just meant. It doesn't matter what he meant, I interrupted. What matters is what you both did, or rather what you didn't do. After another unsuccessful attempt to justify their behavior, Imogen ended the call with a thinly veiled threat. Clayton's consulting with a lawyer about this. Don't think you can just cut us out, Mom. But that was precisely what I could and did do. The next year passed more peacefully than I could have imagined. My health improved partly. Due to my renewed sense of purpose, I began volunteering at Suncrest, helping other residents navigate their own family challenges. I continued tutoring Dante, who was now approaching graduation with honors. Dante introduced me to his girlfriend Elena, who worked at a local bakery and brought me fresh pastries every Sunday. They included me in their small celebrations, dinners, movie nights, a weekend trip to Sedona, where Elena's family owned a small cabin. My relationship with my biological children remained strained and distant. Clayton attempted legal action to regain control of my finances, but Atticus handily defeated his claims with thorough documentation of my competence and their neglect. Imogen sent occasional texts that read like obligations rather than genuine communication. Neither of them knew about the changes I'd made to my will. Neither of them asked how I was really doing, or who was keeping me company, or what brought me joy in my daily life. And then just after my 79th birthday, my health took a sudden decline. A series of small strokes left me weakened. My speech sometimes slurred, my right side partially paralyzed. The prognosis wasn't good. Clayton and Imogen both flew in when Suncrest notified them of my condition. They arrived with concerned expressions and questions for the doctors that pointedly excluded me from the conversation. What are her treatment options? Clayton asked the neurologist standing at the foot of my bed, as if I weren't present or capable of understanding. Has anyone discussed end-of-life care? Imogen inquired, her clinical detachment firmly in place. Neither of them held my hand. Neither of them asked what I wanted. Dante visited every day, sometimes bringing Elena, sometimes coming alone. He read to me when my vision was too blurry for reading. He helped me with my physical therapy exercises. He made me laugh with stories about his fellow students and their graduation preparations. One evening, when my condition had stabilized enough for regular visitors, Clayton and Imogen arrived together, the first time they'd visited simultaneously since my hospitalization. Mom. Clayton began, his tone serious. We've been discussing your situation, and we think it's time to consider moving you to a facility with more intensive care. Suncrest isn't equipped for long-term medical needs like yours, Imogen added. There's a place in Tucson that specializes in stroke recovery. They presented this decision as if it had already been made, as if my opinion was a formality rather than a requirement. Once again, they were prepared to pack up my life and move me according to their convenience. I looked from one to the other. These children I had raised, these strangers who shared my blood, but not my heart. No! I said the word slurred but unmistakable. Mom, be reasonable. Clayton insisted. This isn't about what you want, it's about what you need. I need family. I replied, each word carefully. Formed real family. They exchanged glances loaded with exasperation. We are your family, Imogen said. That's why we're making these difficult decisions. No, I repeated, your relatives, not family. When they left that evening, frustrated by my stubbornness, I asked the night nurse to call Atticus Finchley. It was time to finalize the remaining details of my plan. 3 weeks later, I died peacefully in my sleep, with Dante holding one hand and Elena the other. According to the nurses, my last conscious words were, "Tell them I found my family after all." The reading of my will was scheduled for 2 weeks after my funeral. Clayton and Imogen arrived at Atticus's office with the confident air of people who expect to receive their due. They barely acknowledged Dante, who sat quietly in the corner of the conference room. Atticus, formal in a charcoal suit, began reading the document that I had crafted so carefully over the previous year. I, Meredith, Eleanor Abernathy, being of sound mind and body, declare this to be my last will and testament. The standard legal preamble gave way to the heart of the matter. Having been informed by my children that I have no close family, I have taken them at their word. Therefore, I bequeath all my worldly possessions, including my home investments, personal effects, and all other assets to the following beneficiaries. To Dante Espinosa, who has shown me the true meaning of family through his consistent kindness, attention, and genuine care. During the final years of my life, I leave my home at 1423 Saguaro Lane, Phoenix, Arizona, along with its contents and the sum of $875,000 to the Meredith Abernathy Future Teachers Scholarship Fund at Phoenix Elementary School District. I leave the sum of $650,000 to be administered by the trustees named herein. To Suncrest Assisted Living, I leave $225,000 to establish a program for residents without family visitors. To my children, Clayton Abernathy and Imogen Whitfield, I leave the knowledge that family is not determined by blood, but by love, attention, and presence. The time and attention you were too busy to give me in life, I now free you from giving me in death. The silence that followed Atticus's reading was absolute. Clayton's face had drained of color, while Imogen's had flushed deeply red. Dante looked stunned, his eyes wide with disbelief. Clayton recovered first. "This is absurd," he sputtered. "She was manipulated by this stranger." He jabbed a finger toward Dante. "She wasn't in her right mind. We'll contest this immediately." Atticus smiled thinly. "I anticipated that response, Mr. Abernathy. That's why your mother underwent 3 separate psychological evaluations during the preparation of this, will all confirming her competence and clarity of purpose." He slid a thick folder across the table. "In addition, we have documented evidence of your abandonment, your statement to Suncrest that your mother had no close family, your repeated refusal to respond to calls about her care, the returned mail, the missed visits, the recorded phone conversations where you discussed waiting for her to become more vulnerable before securing control of her assets." Clayton's expression shifted from outrage to alarm. "You recorded our conversations. That's illegal." "Arizona is a one-party consent state for recordings," Atticus replied calmly, "and your mother was very thorough in documenting your neglect." Imogen, whose medical training perhaps made her more realistic about their situation, placed a restraining hand on Clayton's arm. "What exactly are you saying?" she asked Atticus. "I'm saying that should you choose to contest this, not only will you almost certainly lose, but the documentation of your abandonment will become public record." Atticus's tone was matter-of-fact. "Your mother hoped it wouldn't come to that. She didn't want to embarrass you. She just wanted you to understand the consequences of your choices." "This isn't right," Clayton insisted, but with less conviction. "We're her children." "Being someone's child doesn't entitle you to their assets," Atticus replied, "especially when you've made it clear that the relationship is a burden rather than a bond." Dante, who had remained silent throughout this exchange, finally spoke. "I didn't know she was doing this," he said quietly. "I never asked for anything. She knew that." Atticus acknowledged. "That's precisely why she chose you, Mr. Espinosa, because you gave without expectation of return." Imogen. Ever the pragmatist recognized defeat when she saw it. "Come on, Clayton," she said, gathering her purse. "There's nothing for us here." As they stood to leave, Atticus held up one hand. "There is one more thing," he said. "Your mother left you each a letter." He handed them 2 sealed envelopes, each addressed in my distinctive teacher's handwriting. Clayton stuffed his into his jacket pocket without a glance, but Imogen paused, running her thumb over her name, written in my hand. After they left, Dante remained still looking shell-shocked. "I can't accept this," he told Atticus. "It's too much. I was just being her friend." Atticus smiled, a genuine warmth replacing his professional demeanor. "Mr. Espinoza, that's exactly why she chose you. Let me show you something." He retrieved a leather-bound journal from his desk drawer. "This is your mother's journal from the last year of her life," he explained, opening it to a marked page. "I think you should read this entry." Dante accepted the journal hesitantly, his eyes moving over my words. "Today Dante brought me daisies because I mentioned once that they were my favorite. Not on my birthday, not for any special occasion, just because he remembered something I said in passing months ago. When was the last time my own children remembered anything about my preferences? Clayton sent a generic flower arrangement when I had my stroke roses and lilies, which he would know I'm allergic to if he'd paid any attention during the 52 years I've been his mother. People say blood is thicker than water, but they misquote the proverb. The full version is, the blood of the covenant is thicker than the water of the womb. It means the relationships we choose and nurture are stronger than those we're born into. Dante has chosen to be family to me in ways my biological children have not. I choose to honor that choice in return." When Dante looked up from the journal, his eyes were wet. "She was like family to me, too," he said simply. "She knew." Atticus assured him, "That's why she left you one more letter." He handed Dante a final envelope, this one thicker than the others. Inside was a letter and a photograph of me in my garden, taken years earlier when I was still strong enough to tend my beloved roses. My letter to Dante was brief but heartfelt. "Dear Dante, if you're reading this, then I've moved on to whatever adventure comes next, and Atticus has explained my decisions. You may feel uncomfortable accepting what I've left you, but please understand this. You gave me back my dignity when my own children treated me as a burden. You reminded me that I still had value when they made me feel worthless. You were the family I chose at the end of my life, and this is my way of thanking you. Use what I've left you to build the life you deserve. Finish your degree. Start that small business you've talked about. Create the family you choose, and remember that real family shows up in good times and bad, without expecting anything in return. With love and gratitude, Meredith." Dante read the letter twice, then carefully folded it and returned it to the envelope. "What happened to the letters she wrote to Clayton and Imogen?" he asked. Atticus shrugged. "I don't know if they'll ever read them, but your mother was prepared for that possibility too. She said that just as they had chosen not to hear her in life, she accepted they might choose not to hear her in death. All she could do was offer them the truth and hope they would eventually be ready to receive it." In the years that followed, Dante honored my wishes in ways that would have made me proud. He finished his business degree and opened a small community center for seniors in my former neighborhood, offering companionship activities and advocacy for elderly residents who, like me, had found themselves alone in their final years. The Meredith Abernathy Future. Teachers' Scholarship helped dozens of promising education students complete their degrees and enter the teaching profession. Many of them volunteered at Dante's Senior Center, creating an intergenerational program that became a model for facilities across Arizona. Clayton never read my letter as far as anyone knows. He pursued legal action briefly, then abandoned it when Atticus made it clear how damaging the publicity would be to his professional reputation. Imogen, perhaps, because her work with children gave her greater insight into the importance of emotional connections, eventually did read my words. A year after my death, she contacted Dante and asked to see the house where I had lived for so many years. He gave her a tour showing her the roses. I had tended the bookshelves. Thaddeus had built the kitchen where I had taught her to bake cookies when she was small. Before she left, she asked Dante an unexpected question. "Were you there at the end?" "Yes," he answered honestly. "Elena and I both were. She wasn't alone." Imogen nodded, fighting tears. "Thank you for that," she said quietly. "I should have been there too." Each Christmas, Dante sends cards to both my children, including photos of the senior center and updates on the scholarship recipients. It's his way of honoring the connection, however broken, that still exists between them. In my final journal entry, written a week before my death, I reflected on the family I had built in my last years. We think our legacy is in our DNA, in the children who carry our features and our name. But perhaps our true legacy is in the love we give freely without obligation or expectation. If so, then I will die rich indeed, surrounded by the family I chose, and who chose me in return. Family isn't always who we expect it to be. Sometimes it's the newspaper delivery person who notices your tears. Sometimes it's the nurse who advocates for your dignity. Sometimes it's the lawyer who ensures your wishes are respected. And sometimes family is whoever shows up day after day, simply because they care.